So, hi Colin, Fraser.
Hi,
Cirklon, Sequentics.
that's right.
You've been around for quite a while, right? The Cirklon has been around for quite a while.
Cirklon we've been doing for 6 years. We did the P3 from 2005 to 2006 as Sequentics. The P3 I designed in the late 90s. It was based off a sequencer I built into the BBC Micro in like 1991, so I was doing this for a long time. I got distracted by computers trying to sequence with a PC for most of the 90s, but went back to hardware sequencers at the end of the 90s. Tried like the MMT8 and a Cheetah thing and a couple of different ones, and decided I would be able to build a better one myself, or at least just go back to using my BBC Micro. So that got turned into a P2, and which then became P3 when it was a standalone unit. We built the P3 as a product of Sequentics Limited from 2005 to 2006, and then the processors became unavailable after the EU banned lead, so we stopped making that for a while, and I decided to design a replacement for it, which took a little while because we started a family at the same time. But 2010 we had the first production prototypes of the Cirklon, and then 2011 we released the first unit, so 6 years it's been going now.
So what was the kind of motivation behind doing like a standalone, like kind of one of the best sequencers in a lot of people's opinion, right?
Right,
or like very, very in depth.
Well, I built it for myself. I'm the prime customer. When I built the first P3s, then my mates came round and I showed them what it did, and they would say, "Oh, can you make me one?" So I made a couple of, like 2 or 3 of them for other people that I knew. When I was doing it like totally DIY, etching circuit boards in a sort of tray full of horrible brown stuff. I only started making them as kits that other people could build when I found Olimex had a website that like 2002, 2003, where you could upload a Gerber file for a PCB and get professionally made PCBs really inexpensively. So at that time I made a post to I think Analog Heaven and Synth DIY and said I've built this sequencer. I can get kits of PCBs made from Olimex. If anybody wants one, if we get enough interest, then we can do them for this price. And lots of people were interested, so we did a couple of runs as kits, and then decided I was in corporate IT at the time, which was just a bit too exciting for me. You know, I was feeling overwhelmed by all the fun and excitement I was having at work, so I decided I would take it down a notch and just,
yeah, I mean, synthesizers are pretty boring.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
In comparison to like corporate IT.
Yeah, it was my wife's fault really. She said, you know, you hate your job. People want to buy your sequencer. Why don't you not pack in the job for a while, see if you can make a living selling the sequencer? So I did that for a while. As I say, then we discontinued the P3 when we couldn't get the parts for it. Started designing the Cirklon at that point, or not specifically the Cirklon, but a replacement for the P3. But we started a family at that time as well, so it took a few years, but then, as I say, eventually it came out. But really, I'm the primary customer for it. But the thing I learned with the P3 was when you give the thing that you've made to somebody else, they say, "Can you get it to do this? Can you get it to do that?" And you think, well, I didn't think of that, but yeah, I would use that feature. So you add that into it and it makes the thing better. And you know, as long as there's space in the code, and as long as it doesn't make the user interface too difficult to navigate by having extra features, there's no reason to not add extra stuff. You know, I think people sometimes maybe say, "Oh, it does too much stuff. I would never use all the capabilities," you know.
But then they don't have to use those.
Exactly, they don't have to. You can buy a Ferrari and you don't have to drive everywhere at 225 miles an hour. You know, you can just think, "This is a really nice car. I'll go fast if I want to, but otherwise I'll just enjoy, a car that's made for driving pleasure." So, similar idea. There's a lot of the stuff in there that I don't particularly use often myself. There was a guy with a Cirklon who came along yesterday and asked if I could implement a certain feature, and I said, "Yeah, well, that would be useful if you were in this like pattern edit mode. You could do a certain thing. Yeah, we'd probably put it on this key, so if you did that," and I pressed the key and it did what he was asking for it to do. And I had no recollection of having added that feature in, but obviously somebody's asked me for it before and I've put it in and then I've forgotten about it. So that's always the best kind of feature request, is a request for a feature that's already in it.
So you can almost have like happy accidents with an instrument that you've designed, because there's so much in there that you forget about it.
Yeah, and people that are, other users will use something that I've put in it to do one thing, and they'll do something different with it that's not something I would have expected they would do, and then I'll either use that myself or say, oh yeah, that gives me an idea to make it easier to use that particular function. I mean, one of the bases of the P3 aux events in the P3 pattern, aux events let you do all sorts of real-time dynamic changes of the pattern as it plays back, and that just came out of a comment like years ago when I showed one of the very early P3s to Paul Nagel, and I was showing him like there was a randomize function where you could hold down a key and it would randomize the pattern values like one off as the pattern played back. It would randomize it, and he said, can you not get it so that it randomizes the note value every time on each step by a certain amount? And I said, well, to do that you'd need to have like a value per step that would set the amount of randomization. And then I thought, well, there's values per step for the CCs. Maybe we could just, instead of having 0 to 127 CCs, the CC numbers from 1 to 8 up could do some kind of modification of the pattern in real time. And that's where the aux events came from. It gave me 128 different numbers, and every different thing I could think of making it do, I could just assign another number to it, and you can put them in the patterns, and it does all sorts of repeating the note and randomising the different values and masking it, setting the probability for the gates triggering and all that sort of stuff that it does.
So with this, you've got like quite a lot of gear going on in this setup.
Oh
here,
no, this is a tiny minimal setup purely for travelling purposes.
So do you want to just talk through what you've kind of got going on and what's kind of being sequenced?
So the Cirklon is the middle, obviously. The Cirklon does MIDI, and there's the optional CV I/O output. We've also got the drum trigger module, which has had a long and painful birth, but is ready for production now. So I've got the JP08 hooked up by MIDI. The 303 is hooked up by MIDI as well. We've got the MIDI bass interface in there that I've been doing for... I did the MIDI bass about the same time as I designed the PT, and it was like 2004 I did that. That's just a little daughter board that sits inside the 303, and it sits between the processor and the synth circuit in the 303, sends MIDI out from the 303 sequencer and receives MIDI back in. So that lets me still use the sequencer in the 303 to create a pattern, and then I can record that into the Cirklon and then edit it more there, or just not forget that I'm using that pattern in a song because it's in there, and then I don't overwrite it and then think, oh shit, what did I do to that pattern?
And I suppose you can use the kind of the low battery kind of automatic generating sequence thing, and then record that into the sequencer. Maybe,
I don't often do that. I've got more of a sort of technique where I just go into write mode and have a sort of muscle memory approach to just tapping in different notes that I know will be roughly right, and running through it, and you do the accents and slides and stuff, and if it's cool, it's cool, and if it's not cool, you just clear that pattern and do another one, and you keep going. But
So you've got a couple of new features.
I've got the CV output is driving the CV board produces 16 CVs and 8 gates. They come out this ribbon cable and go into this is the, if you can see this through the spaghetti, that's the Euro Bob, which just gives you a 3.5mm socket for each of those CV and gate outputs. I'm only a kind of recent newbie to Eurorack. I came to Superbooth last year and tried out Dave Rossum's filter, which I liked so much I thought I need to buy one of those filters. Bought the filter module and then thought, oh god, I'm going to have to buy more Euroracks to go with it.
It's a slippery slope, isn't it? I can see also you've put a zero coast into the rack.
Yeah, that was quite easy to do. You just have to hold it by the knobs, and you can chip the case off round the edge with a hammer, and then you just kind of poke it in there, and if you screw it tight enough, it'll just... Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but it can be done. I had a big... This Ross Lamon just made this case for me,
He's always making cases for everyone.
About 5 minutes before he was having to leave to get the ferry to come here, and he managed to post it up to me in time, and we did it with 2 racks. This was all I had until like 2 weeks ago, and then I bought the Atlantis, which is a great thing, and the Old Coast as well. So in the CV output, we've got a CV and gate driving the Atlantis and a velocity CV mapped into the filter modulation, and then we've got a couple of CVs, the CV and gate controlling the Old Coast. I'm not using it by MIDI, I'm using it by CV. I've not actually tried the MIDI out on that yet. I'm sure it works brilliantly. Robert from Make Noise was here the other day and stuck some extra cables in, and I've no idea what they're doing, but it does make all sorts of nice noises. So then here I've got the dual Roland oscillator going into one oscillator is going into the Rossum filter and into a mutable Veils VCA. The other oscillator is going into the Make Noise MMG and into the other filter. I've not got any envelopes there because one of the new features that I'm working on in the OS at the moment is that this level's okay. Do you want that bit quiet? That's fine. This CV output there's 2 CV outputs here that I've assigned to envelope generators, and
so the Cirklon is now generating.
Cirklon's generating envelopes in software, but it's a fast processor, so it's able to do snappy curves. The envelope parameters are mapped for like the instrument. Cirklon, you work in terms of instruments, so you define your instrument. You say what MIDI channel or port it's on, or if it's on the CV port, and then you can also say it uses these MIDI controller numbers, and you can give them a label. So these controllers are so you get they're pretty snappy envelopes. That's my filter envelope, and then I've got the second envelope generator assigned. So because the envelopes are being generated inside Cirklon, and it's CCs that are controlling the parameters, I can sequence them in a pattern, and I could get a voltage-controlled envelope generator module, but then I'd be using 4 CV outputs to control the ADS and R parameters on it. So, and I'm Scottish, so the opportunity to not have to pay for an envelope generator greatly appealed to me. So this is coming in the next few weeks. I'll have this in a release OS build. So that's one oscillator and the Rossum filter, and I've got another instrument going through the Make Noise filter, which has its own. Sure what it's doing what here. I've had this set up with stuff to demonstrate, and then you turn your back and they will come along and they move everything around. So. But yeah, so that's new. We've got the drum trigger module, which is that was something I added the functionality for at a really late stage when I was designing the Cirklon. The Cirklon processor has a 12-bit DAC built in, and I was going to use that originally for the CVIO output, but then I decided 12 bits wasn't enough to do really smooth pitch slides and things like that, so I put a 16-bit DAC onto the CVIO board. The 12-bit DAC was free. I had the DIN sync socket, which has 3 digital lines, and there's a spare pin, so there's 5 pin DIN, there's 3 digital lines on the ground. The spare pin, I took the DAC from the CPU and put that out there so it can send out an analog voltage. So the drum mux output, when you tell it that it's to be in the drum mux mode, the 3 pins of the DIN sync socket become like a high-speed serial interface. You can map up to 48 triggers to MIDI notes on a channel in the CV port. When the pattern plays those MIDI notes, the data is all sent in a really rapid burst. It takes about the same time to send all 48 drum triggers as it does to send like one MIDI note on message, because it doesn't need to send like a binary data for the accent CV, because the accent CV is just the analog voltage changes on that pin, and that's sampled around each of the accent CV outputs. the trigger data is loaded into the processor in here, and then at the end of that millisecond burst, all of the output trigger pulses are updated exactly the same instant.
So is the trigger breakout available now?
It's going into production when I get back from Superbooth. There was a slight problem with the final production board, so we're now on the final production board. But yeah, I'm happy with it now, and it's going to go into production, so we should have them in sort of 8 to 12 weeks. They should be ready to go. So
if people want to get a Cirklon, because there's classically kind of quite a long lead time, right?
Yeah, when we did the first run, at that point it had been like 4 years since we had sold a P3. In the sort of year and a half that they were selling the P3, we sold 140 units. So I really had no idea whether anyone would remember who Sequentix was or whether they would buy them. So fortunately for us, the first run of Cirklon sold really well. We've always struggled to find someone to manufacture the units. Where we are in Scotland, it's very scenic, but it's not exactly a hotbed of high-tech manufacture. So we've been through a few different UK-based manufacturers. We've got a manufacturer now that we're happy with, that we've been using since last year. Since the beginning, I had been involved in like assembling each unit myself. The boards would come in stuffed with the components, but I was like pushing on all the keys and knobs and everything, hoping that we would get a PCB maker. We would get to the point where we trusted them enough that they would do it. So the guys that we've got now, they're in Hampshire. They're building complete units that come to me, so we've hugely increased production. We've done 3 times as many in the last year as we managed to do in our best year so far. And we have 2 years worth of units expected in the next 5 months.
Excellent.
We're also moving to Berlin in July. We came to Berlin first time in 2014, and there's such a high density of Cirklon owners here. Like where I live in Scotland, in the 6 years we've been building Cirklon, I've maybe had half a dozen Cirklon users actually visit us, you know, and they're usually quite adventurous, hard-going types that want to go out into the wilderness, you know. And then the first time we came to Berlin, the first week we were here, we went to visit one customer in his studio, and he's like, oh yeah, the guy in the next studio, he's got one of your machines, let's go and see him. And we went next door, and he said, oh, they've got one, and they've got one. So there was like half a dozen guys in the studio complex that were all using them. So like that week we met.
Just kind of makes sense to be.
I thought, yeah, and
more around your customers.
See, when you're in the end of email and you're getting feature requests, and somebody can ask you for something, they would say it would be great if it did this thing, and they explain it, and I'm sure they've explained it in a way that they understood it. But I read it over. God, I have no idea.
Yeah. But if you're in a room with someone,
if you meet someone and you show them how the thing, and also even just from the sort of like the rubber duck point of view, when you explain something to somebody in person, you see, like if there's something that's not as usable as it should be, it becomes really obvious when you're showing it to somebody physically that you think, oh yeah, maybe that's not as good as it could be, I could change that. So yeah, every time I meet up with a Cirklon owner and we talk about stuff, and they talk about stuff that they'd like it to do, it's much easier to get a handle on what they're wanting it to do and how they're using it, you know. So yeah, we decided to move to Berlin, and that's all done and dusted, and we move over in July.
Excellent. And a little birdie told me that you were in the Bergheim at 5 o'clock this morning, and you haven't been to sleep yet. So good work.
No, we had a disco nap before we went to bed.
Okay, a disco nap. All right, that's all right then. Okay, well, thank you very much, Colin, for speaking.
No problem.
To us.
Thank you.
Cheers.